Hello Cardstack community, this is Chris C., the founding director of the Cardstack Project, coming to you today to talk about media registries, or more generally about using Cardstack with our Git and Gitchain implementation along with the blockchain software to build all kinds of registries. I prepared this talk that I'm about to give you for the Hyperledger member summit, which is going to be in Tokyo next week. So I'm recording this talk to give the community a preview of what's being discussed in the space of, call it enterprise blockchain or permission blockchain, about building these kind of collaborative registry where multiple companies, organizations come together using a blockchain to synchronize not only business process but data sharing. So with the media industry, or the music industry in particular, there is a particular set of concerns I'll go into a little bit about what does it mean to build a functional, useful, and scalable media registry on top of a blockchain, and how the Cardstack Framework can help facilitate a lot of the data orchestration, workflow, permissioning that is inherent in building production system that companies and businesses can rely on to perform the workflow and run their enterprises. So this is a little bit of a preview of what we're going to discuss broader with the Hyperledger community about how Cardstack is applicable to the type of applications that has this characteristic of being a registry. So let's dive right in. So one thing to look at about registry is that there are many types of registries in the world, whether they are centralized or whether they are decentralized, and most, I would say 99% of all registries are database in somewhere. There are a lot of different aspects of what you want to be able to officially encode, publicly made available sometimes, and sometimes some informations are publicly available, some information requires some permissioning. And that could include licenses. Are you licensed to be a doctor in this country or state? Standards registry, like what is the standard of this unit? And identifier, are you part of this company? Do you have a number to identify yourself, whether it's for an individual or for an organization? So ownership registry, who owns this land? Property registry, product registry, what is the barcode, as everybody know what it is once you put that on the thing. So registry is just a very common and very important type of databases or infrastructure that allows the world to function correctly. Now, the registry that we explored using a Cardstack framework and in partnership with Blockchain Music, it's about media. It's about how do you encode who owns the media, who created the media, and how that all works. So if you look at the media registry use case, what you're going to see here is that the media registry as a category, right, contains a lot of the elements that are independent thing. We don't need an identifier database for every single person that is a citizen of a country, but we do need an identifier of who is the writer, an artist, who they, what company or what label they belong to. We need to know what ownership, who owns music. Now, I wrote a song, I own it, that's pretty cool. But if you own 20% of the Beatles catalog, that's talking about multiple $1 million of value that's being exchanged at any given time. Assets, that could be a financial asset using that kind of song rights and assets, but also asset just as a way of thinking about files that's associated with cover arts and stuff like that. These are media assets that's part of that. So the music problem is actually slightly more complicated than that, which is that not only it contains the follow element, it also splits this into two halves. So in the music world, there is a difference between recording and composition. So recording is actually a relatively new concept. Ever since the day of Mozart, the music is really about composition. Composition is something that you write and then you give sheet music or some instruction to a musician, some session musician or violinist, and they go play that. It's through the advent of the recorded music, now we start having something where the asset is not just the sheet music to perform or the melody or the chords that makes you kind of know what it is. It's also the asset about the actual recording itself. So when we look at the music registry, the one way to look at it is that the recording is what you listen to on Spotify, and that's most people are very familiar with that concept. And the composition is the tune you sing in the shower. So it's your own rendition of it, and there could be many, many renditions of it you recorded it while you're singing in the shower, you can actually put it on a streaming service, and that would be another recording of the same composition. So between the composition and recording, there are different people who owns the label rights, the master recording, and there are different companies that owns the composition. So the key in the music registry and the core business problem that people like dotBC and its partners are solving is the linkages, the missing links between the recording and composition. So this part is really what led us to a proof of concept exercise that we did towards the latter part of 2018 and the first quarter of 2019, which is working with a top 3 record label, Warner Music Group, and their affiliated music publisher, One Chappell Music. They're both about the 3rd largest in the area. They're considered the big 3 in each of the domain. And they are, while owned by the same company and sharing some name with the Warner name, they are actually a completely separate organization with very different backend, because the history of publishing and recording or record label is just so different. While they depend on each other, a song is almost always recorded to be by different recording label artists, and then there are a relationship where the Warner Chappell Music, their compositions are being recorded by Sony Music and Universal Music artists. Cut for songs and stuff like that happens all the time. So between these 2 entities, we were trying to figure out what the missing links are, where we were able to use a blockchain and use a blockchain-backed registry to associate when the instances where a work, a musical work, a composition, is being recorded by that artist, and then have that record update as we find these linkages, as we update the metadata within them. So that's essentially what happened with as a kind of pilot or proof of concept under the dotBlockchain umbrella, with dotBlockchain acting as a facilitator of this relationship. And in the quarter 2 of 2019, we completed the phase 1 of this project, connecting the works together and providing and instantiating a blockchain-based registry using Cardstack and now Gitchain technology to make that work. And going forward, as we continue evolving this, the hope is there's more than 2 parties. As more people is going to be involved to connect to and say, hey, I'm interested in this song that I made a recording of. Has the ownership information changed? Has the songwriter sold his rights to a new publisher or collecting the royalty differently? Do I need to pay a different person, write a different check, and hopefully in one day stream the payments to the right person based on this ownership data? So before we go a little further on, let's take a little bit of a look at what is the architecture that that we put together for this music registry. So we use something that is what we call Cardstack registry architecture. So the Cardstack architecture is quite general purpose. It's essentially a application framework for application that exhibit characteristic of decentralization for local control, but also had this global synchronization. Registry is being one of those use cases. In a registry, in a particular registry, in this case a music registry, you define something called a schema. And a schema which basically be what is the type of information that you would accept when someone to say, I would like to submit a song. Well, a song is a schema. I would like to submit myself as an artist onto registry. Well, an artist is a schema. I would like to submit this little recording I made in my bathroom as a media asset. Well, we need to recognize media asset. I would like to be able to tag someone as a guitarist or drummer in the thing. Well, that is another piece of metadata about what happened in the recording session. So in this case, the schema that we included here include master recording, the artist, the master owner, copyright, genre, release artwork, the cover art that you see, the region where it's being distributed, the song, the writer, the owner, the works owner, the works right, and then the region on how the royalty rights are being collected. So these schemas is a subset of all the information that's available in the music industry. But in this proof of concept we're doing now and using the Cardstack schema architecture, we decided to start with this as a core way of connecting the two pieces together, recording and composition, and then providing enough information that it is commercially useful and viable. So once we define the schema, which we figure out what fields and what are IDs and what we want to include and how they relate to each other, how a recording related to a song, how a work related to its owner, then we create a version repository. For those that's been kind of following Cardstack, you would know that we're using a combination of version control system, something like Git or GitHub, and a blockchain And a version repository would be the GitHub part. It would be that we would put this information in a repository, and Git is a version control repository that when you commit or when you add a new file, when you change a record, it creates this ledger or this amendment track record that uses cryptographic hash to say this version is a revision of that previous version because I updated the spelling of my name. And then this version is a new version because I wrote a new song. So I'm going to point to my artist record. And this version repository is anchored to a ledger. And a ledger could be a blockchain, something that has a block structure, as a chain of blocks that uses either proof of stake or proof of work as a way to do it. So basically Ethereum and stuff like that. But it could also be a ledger that is kind of a database that has some sort of immutable characteristic, and there's a couple of them in the Hyperledger space. Fabric is a ledger that is in the blockchain, but Hyperledger Fabric is underpinning a lot of very interesting enterprise, blockchain style project, even though it's not blockchain. We end up using a Hyperledger Sawtooth, which is a real blockchain, acting as that anchor so that the commits or the changes or the submission within the version repository end up being anchored and associated with a record and an amendment. We'll talk about how that looks like. But a version repository on a ledger itself is not enough for people to see what's going on. People want to search a registry. Like when you go to IMDb, which is a centralized registry owned by IMDb, which is owned by Amazon, you want to be able to type a name of a movie star and be able to see all the movies they're part of. You want to be able to see all the genre and see all the films in that area. You want to see everything that this cinematographer you really respect. So the indexes, the ability for you to traverse and navigate the relationship between these schemas is a very important part of how a registry is being used. Now imagine if you're an artist or a actor, you want to say, I want to update my information on IMDb. You want to be able to then say, from the searchable index, submit a new version of your information that your agent decided you upload a new thing or new asset that is your new headshot. Then that would get pushed to a repository, and because you can prove that you are indeed the artist or the actor, that gets committed to that ledger or they get accepted by other people. So the combination of the version repository, which is really where the truth lies, anchor on a blockchain so that nobody can say, oh, you didn't submit it. You put it on a public blockchain, or permission blockchain. Someone can prove that actually indeed happened on that day. And the searchable database just say, hey, don't look at me. I'm just reflecting what is in the sum of this repository and this ledger. And that's essentially how we create end-user facing workflow application for people. So, as we mentioned, the version repository is based on Git technology. Git is actually an open source project created by the founder of Linux called Linus Torvalds, and it can be used on your computer without having to upload anywhere else. But if you share that Git repository with other people on the internet, or you create a commit and a pull request so that you say, hey, I made changes, you should include my changes in your repository, that's when collaboration and changes occur. And you can get a little more detail about Git and how that relates to GitHub, which is an open source community sharing code in my talk on Gitchain. But for the purpose of this, I'm going to give you a quick introduction of how we combine this version repository using Git with the ledger. So in this case, the content and data code, so the actual elements of the registry, so the submission that would be cover art would be content, data would be your name, and code would be maybe some correlation between things. This information is in a Git repository, and then we push it into this combination of Git and blockchain. So we create something called pack file. Think of a pack file as a zip file of all the changes you've made. So instead of putting each change you make on the amendment ledger, go into the blockchain and say, I changed my name by one character. I added one artist or one guitarist. I add another guitarist. If each of those changes are on it, it's going to be extremely difficult. So what we do is we pack together, waiting for a set of commits, a set of incremental changes into a pack file, and then we push that to an object storage storage, which is like a file storage, and then we tell the blockchain, say, hey, get the 50 changes I made or 50 songs I'm registering from this little zip file that exists. And then all someone else needs to do is to listen to the ledger and say, I would like to update this ledger to the latest thing. So, someone uploaded 50 files. Let me go and find this pack file, unpack it, and now I can recreate the Git repository and essentially syncing from my submission to the repository to now everybody's repository being synchronized, having a copy of that information. That's essentially what happens. We try to put little bits of information, but do permission control in the amendment ledger layer. It's like, are you allowed to update this? Or do I trust that your changes are indeed the real changes? Are you making changes in master? And then based on that, that would allow us to use the information submitted off-chain, so elsewhere, a large amount of metadata, and then sync it into the Git repository. And then this Git repository that contains the information that is kind of unpacked from this Gitchain or object and amendment layer working together is essentially what we believe is the truth, right? Like that is as if you added something to Wikipedia and now it's truth. Well, Wikipedia is a version control system. Whatever has been updated is now at least as true as we can expect it on the internet, as true as anything it is in this world that we live in. Now imagine if that Wikipedia page is actually managed by Git repository, and then the UI of that would be what we call Card UI, where we reflect different aspects of this data, or the card UI that represent the artist, the card UI that represent the cover art. All this information are now displayable in what we call the user hub. And that's where Cardstack, from an end user point of view, comes in. So this is indexing everything that's in this file folder, which is similar to how your computer indexes everything you keep in your Dropbox or everything you keep in your documents folder, and then allows you to quickly find it. But in this case, we actually lay it out very nicely. So that's what we call orchestrating the full user experience. Every user, every enterprise user, essentially log into Cardstack, update through the card UI the information they want to submit or revise or something like that. That causes a change and a correlation to the Git repository, and then through the Gitchain mechanism, amendment ledger and object storage working together, it syndicates to all the other parties. So that's what it looks like here, the 4 layers here. Notice that layer 1 and layer 1, this is not numbered correctly, is because both object storage and amendment in the blockchain space will is considered layer 1 technology. We're using Git as a layer 2, and Cardstack, that user experience layer, is what we call layer 3. So that's just the kind of terminology there. So that's what we did. We went ahead and built a schema-driven metadata entry and approval tools. So the metadata would be master recording artist, master owner, different roles in there. And then the workflow would be requesting access, allowing you to match something, submitting for changes, letting people approve it. And that's all done in the inboxes aspects to look at the queue and information. And that information is then punched on-chain when a certain type of approval action happens. So we have more than 50,000 entries or different musical work and composition being correlated, linking to almost 26 gigs of audio that is made available, some of which are even additionally watermarked, and the watermark points back to the blockchain record. And the key here is that all of this stuff has less than a few hundred transactions on-chain. So instead of trying to put every piece of information on chain, which could be expensive, especially on a public chain if that's what you wanted, but even on the private chain, it is something that's very difficult. By bundling the changes and say, oh, I'm ready to submit these Excel file reflecting the change. Well, we take that granularity and use that as the number of times you have to tell the blockchain, say, please record this one row that points to all the changes I made in this folder or this Git repository. So that's what we deliver. That's called the dotBC app, and obviously this is one step. It uses the Cardstack Framework and is pretty much kind of a standard app that uses our existing schema editor that we auto-generate. It's not a lot of consumer front end, but it certainly demonstrates how you can mutate that. The information is also synchronized to GitHub, so you can actually use traditional kind of developer tools to go and see what changes have been made and how these versions are controlled in the standard Git protocol way. So what we wanted to do is that using this built on Cardstack idea, these workflow can be a lot more user-friendly, right? So it doesn't need to, you don't have to understand Git and merging and branching, all this stuff like that. A lot of things is just files moving back and forth. So in this particular example, you can see someone just getting like, hey, please fill out this survey, or this survey could be please fill out this information about your recording session you just have. And that could correspond to a form you just fill out and submit it, and that's how you get on chain. So the reason I want to emphasize workflow is that, a lot of blockchain application is so focused on what we're putting on chain, the cryptographic foundation, that they forget that the mental model, how the user sees, how they interact with the information system is actually paramount. We can actually hide or recast a lot of what's going on in blockchain, like email. Like when I'm submitting something to add to registry, sometimes I email a lawyer for that person to file a brief or file an amendment, or I submit it using a web tool. We want to have that experience for registry interaction. So if there's an approval process, you may submit to another person, they approve it, and then two signature allows it to go on chain, and that's where they approve. And then when you're a person who's like, oh, someone need me to review this information, let me go and see, click on it, and open that information, and like Slack, like 3 new message. What's trying to do? You're trying to update information. Cool, you're my artist. I'll do that. Versus you're trying to steal my rights. You're trying to steal 20% of my catalog and start making money. So no, please go away, and I'm gonna vote against you. So this idea of being able to have this queue, which is on the right side of the page, telling you what you need to respond to. Of the things we've indexed on the blockchain that you may need to attend to, we prioritize it. The things that need to respond bubble up, things that are just, someone update the spelling or something that may not actually matter. And that's the key here, is that all these stuff and can be prioritized, and you can go click on it, and then when you open up the edit, you're actually editing the little form that you saw in the previous version, but we're just putting that editing experience, that amendment experience within the workflow that people understand. So at the end of the day, you may even be able to use the messaging interface to do a bulk number of things where you're sending to a couple of people, gathering rights. And in the music use case especially, there are a lot of times that people need to clear rights for a song. And to clear rights for a song, you have to get permission from the person who recorded the master recording, the Spotify piece, the person who wrote the song, and they all have to say yes. If you're doing it for a political campaign or something like that, they have to agree on that. Imagine using this kind of workflow interface to coordinate a yes from everybody, and using some social pressure. It's like 4 out of 5 people already said yes. Don't you want the money? Don't you want, to support this cause? And that's what we want to be able to support with the Cardflow software. So multi-party conversational workflow experience as a way to contextualize what the user would see, and then each of these cards mapped to the blockchain record is actually amending things on the blockchain, not just sending a thing on iMessage and it's, I lost it and it's gone forever. It's actually every interaction within this workflow system is updating this very important amendment ledger anchor on chain. So for us, the most important thing to know about Cardstack is that we keep everything we do in the Cardstack framework 100% open source. Now, obviously, if a business were to write a registry for their own product, or business consortium come together and build a registry for sharing parts, data, and something like that, those are going to be closed source projects. But the core framework itself is 100% open source and MIT license. And the way we want to do this is that while we want to support the Hyperledger project, we want to leverage the Ethereum ecosystem's energy, we want to basically be able to be blockchain cloud agnostic. If your registry needs to be in a regular database running on a Postgres SQL database, we want to be able to support that use case. If you're comfortable putting that on a public chain and you're willing to pay the fees for that, we want you to do that. If you want to use one of the Hyperledger because it has the characteristic and the community you want to do that, with a plugin, the Gitchain part, the part that is actually schema-driven, can anchor or in some cases unpack the pack file and actually write some of the data on chain so you can actually see it using a Fabric tool to inspect the data. So how much you unpack it is entirely agnostic. But one of the key things, and what I want to kind of wrap up this talk talking about, is that we want to have the Cardstack hub, the Cardstack node that you run, to allow you to interact with many different networks. Because if you think about it, how many websites do you have to log into to update your information that's in other people's registry? Most of the time, you just say, oh, that's in the government registry. I need to log in there and go click format downs and update my driver license information. And then you have another registry. It's like, oh, I need to go and update this information for my professional licenses. And it's a different place. And obviously music, and get it to show up to Apple Music. The workflow is not simple, even though a lot of people are working very hard on it. So the Cardstack vision, kind of going beyond, this media use case, going back to kind of what we were talking about before in the diagram we shown, is that we really see that registry that's built on Cardstack, at least revealed through the Cardstack as that layer 3 user hub, should really allow users, right, to be able to not just interact with the Blockchain Music Registry or maybe other media registry for film or for journalism or for trusted media and stuff like that, but to actually say, you know what, this is the center. We have this user experience using Card UI. Some of the cards that I'm getting in my workflow system may be related to media. Some of them is people trying to pay me. Some of them is people saying, "Hey, can I get your company's information through a company registry?" Some of them is transferring ownership. It could be game objects you're transferring, but you're using the same Cardstack-based card flow workflow system to interact with all these registry. And I think that's really the goal here. Because the goal is not necessarily that we want Cardstack to be in the center of the world. What we want is the user to be at the center of the world. So the idea is that the user runs Cardstack and able to put themselves and say, through the Cardstack interface, I have this direct access, this easy Card UI-based access to the world there. So when we look at the idea of what people really care about is that they care about their identity, my creation, my properties, my right, my membership, my rewards. This is much more important to them than their label or their car or their state's Department of Motor Vehicle, DMV. Those are not really what they care about. They care about their ability to drive their car. This is something that's much more important to them. Is there a way for us to allow them to cohesively interact with registry away from even websites that you have to log in and get an approach, but using the blockchain and using cryptography as a way to say, hey, if it's kind of anchored in the blockchain, then your key is actually unlocking not just your media step, but also other things as well. And the other thing is that we've learned quite a bit by defining schemas as a way to say, hey, a music registry are just these 10 content type or data type. But we end up having to write the structure on chain to create that stuff. Is it possible for us to do on chain type of work where the schema we define in Cardstack end up generating the on-chain record? So a blockchain that has a concept of owners and percentages, a blockchain that has an understanding of identifiers, and a concept that has a concept of granting rights for people to either access or amend your data because you're part of the same band. So can this schema model we create in Cardstack, which is now kind of a visualization and interaction orchestration layer, actually migrate and translate into the underlying layer so that building blockchain-based network is something you can kind of just do without worry about having to do smart contract programming, define your stuff in Cardstack and be able to do that. So really thinking about leveraging the Cardstack schema, not just a way to visualize and orchestrate, but actually in the future as the creation tool of blockchain-based network. And finally, one of the things that we keep getting back into as we solve these difficult challenges in the kind of back-end and lower level stack is what of these back-end capability of Gitchain and amendment ledger, how does that bubble up to the user experience? Like, what's the difference between editing and amendment? Like, editing is simple. I go on something, I update my password, it is there. Amendment is kind of, I'm requesting this to be done, and it may or may not happen. It may or may not mine in an Ethereum sense. It may or may not get approved if you're requesting another person to sign off that change before it comes approval. So that approve and deny and workflow really gets in the way of the simplicity that people expect, but actually makes for a system which is much more sound. Someone can just willy-nilly delete or edit something. There's always a record trail. You can always trust that the network in general is protecting the data and making sure that the transitions or the changes are actually made in a sound way. And then the final thing is transparent per user transaction signing, right? So in Gitchain, what we're doing now is that when the application updates the information, our server, the Cardstack Hub, signs the transaction and put it on the blockchain. But it would be way better, especially with the end user interacting with the registry themselves, is to use the user's own key, the user's own identity, and say, hey, as the second band member of Maroon 6, I am signing that I am leaving the band, right? So it would be good for that to be not just coming from a server because Twitter said so, but actually there's someone like take a wallet or some sort of authenticate themselves before signing this transaction. So how do you do these type of cryptographical signing that blockchains are both good at from a mathematical foundation and a theory point of view, but also bad at in the way the UI and the difficulty people are going through. So a lot of work that we're going into now as we're thinking about Cardstack is letting that happen very well. So those are the things we've learned from this project. We continue to improve both not only the registry infrastructure and the hub, and continue working on understanding the workflow of what the music and media industry would need, expanding through that blockchain's kind of efforts and business development, the number of participants that's coming to this consortium network that we're putting together using Cardstack as the runtime, but certainly customizing and adapting to the workflow in a particular industry. So that's kind of a snapshot of where we are in terms of what Cardstack is doing in this kind of, you call it an enterprise use case. But we see Cardstack as an application framework, as a user experience, to be something that would be applicable to many registry use case. So my hope is that to continue conversation with people in the Hyperledger community and also in the Ethereum community, looking at registry as a very important use case of going beyond just money and finance or decentralized finance into something that actually affects people, how business is conducted. And I believe the Cardstack will be a huge role in facilitating not only the plumbing of the data and making sure that the data is done the right way and managing the sanctity of the registry, but also making sure there's a fun experience for all participating. So thank you very much for your time today. And I will record more talks once I return to my Asia trip, which one of the stops would be to give this particular version of talk to the community, the private community with the Hyperledger members. And then we'll keep you guys up to date on the iterations that we have planned for the software stack, so that the schema system and the hub system and the way we deal with synchronizing through different various blockchain, including Ethereum and Hyperledger Sawtooth, how that is going. We do expect to release a version of the underlying foundational registry software using Ethereum IPFS on top of Gitchain, as we have talked about before, very soon. And when we have that, I'll work with Alex Speller, who's working on that project, to give you guys a demo of that. So that's it. Thank you very much for your time. We'll chat soon.